What does God really want from us? Sacrifice or justice? What if the voice for justice didn't thunder from a king's palace, but whispered from a shepherd's pasture on the edge of nowhere? What if the most powerful message in the land came from a man the world barely noticed? Would you hear it or turn away? Tonight, we travel with Micah, from muddy village fields to the crowded city gates of Jerusalem. We'll walk the path from harsh warning to a hope that heals and discover why his cry for justice still shakes hearts today. Let's journey back to a land where mist settles over stony hills, where the sun sets behind the olive trees, and where, under that glow, a simple man stands watching Jerusalem's towers blaze against a darkening sky. He sees gold and power shining in the distance, but closer, he feels the weight of silence, the cries of the hungry, the sighs of the forgotten, the prayers of the oppressed, lost beneath the noise of ritual. Micah is just a villager, but his heart aches for something true. He's not a priest, not a prince, just a witness to the shadow and the light that share this land. From the field, he watches as justice is bought and sold. He senses God's pain more than incense. God wants a river of justice to flow. To uncover this destiny, we must first return to where it all began. A quiet field, a restless heart, and a question that refuses to be silent. What if the next messenger God chooses doesn't come from the palace or the temple, but from a small village forgotten by most? That's where our story begins, not in Jerusalem's bustling markets, but in Moresheth, a patchwork of fields and stony roads at the far edge of Judah. Micah grew up in this quiet place. He was a son of the soil, his hands rough from work, his eyes sharp from scanning the hills for rain or danger. His world was one of hard labor and simple joys, shared with neighbors who lived day to day, often at the mercy of richer men in distant cities. But behind the peaceful rhythm of village life lay a different reality. Micah watched as friends lost their land to greedy landowners. He saw mothers weep when their sons were taken as collateral for debts. The stories that drifted down from Jerusalem were not of justice, but of judges bought and sold, and priests who spoke blessing for the highest bidder. It would have been easy for Micah to keep his head down, to focus on planting and harvest, to accept the world as it was. But his heart didn't let him rest. Even as a boy, he noticed what others ignored: the bruised, the broken, the neighbor left hungry, while feasts filled other tables. Something in Micah kept asking, why should the innocent suffer while the powerful celebrate? Why do God's people turn away from their own? These questions didn't go away as he grew. They pressed deeper, forming a quiet ache, a longing for justice, a hunger for mercy, an unspoken prayer. Lord, do you see? Maybe that's exactly why God saw Micah. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't trained in the courts or the synagogues. But he had a heart that felt what God felt. Micah's pain for his people became the spark for a calling that would shake the walls of Jerusalem. That's the pattern of God through all of Scripture, choosing the nobodies, lifting up the overlooked to speak the words the world refuses to hear. Think of Moses, a runaway shepherd called to confront Pharaoh, or David, the youngest son left with the sheep until the prophet came knocking. History proves it again and again. Real movements for justice, real change, often start from the margins, not the center. From the coal mines of Wales to the bus boycotts of Montgomery, Alabama, ordinary men and women have carried messages that echo far beyond their hometowns. Micah stands in their company. He was no hero in the world's eyes, but when the suffering of the poor broke his heart, he listened. And when God whispered a challenge to leave the safety of the fields and speak uncomfortable truth to the city, he said yes. That yes is what still matters. It's a reminder that you don't need titles, wealth, or pedigree to be used by God. What God seeks is a heart awake to the pain around it, a willingness to stand up when everyone else sits down. Micah's story calls us to pay attention not just to power, but to the powerless, to believe that one voice, even from the outskirts, can make heaven's justice roll through a whole land. But the story doesn't stop here. Micah's heart will soon face a city where privilege and poverty collide, and his message will test the courage of all who hear it. Will the world listen or turn away as before? We journey on from the quiet fields of Moresheth toward the gates of Jerusalem, where comfort and conscience are about to clash. What happens when God interrupts your quiet life and calls you into something you never expected? For Micah, the moment came not in a grand temple, but on a lonely field beneath the open sky. The night was still. The only sounds were the soft rustle of wind and distant voices from the village winding down. Micah was just a villager, with calloused hands and a simple routine, but his heart carried question that never let him rest. It was during one of those silent nights, with only the stars as witnesses, that Micah felt a weight descend, a presence he could not explain, not a voice thundering from the clouds, but a quiet conviction, deep and irresistible, a sense that God was near and that the ache Micah felt for justice was not his alone. Imagine the fear and awe of that moment, called to speak truth to power, to confront priests and princes, while you yourself have no title, no followers, no armor, but faith. Micah must have wrestled with himself. Who am I to stand before kings? Who will listen to me, a countryman from the margins? The pull between obedience and fear is as old as Scripture itself. But in that field, Micah knew there was no turning back. He later described it this way: "But as for me, I am filled with power, with the Spirit of the Lord, and with justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgression, to Israel his sin." Micah 3:8. Notice, Micah didn't feel mighty in himself. He felt the Spirit's weight, a courage that was not his own. This wasn't about tradition, not about being born into the right family, not about mastering religious rituals. Micah's calling broke the mold. God doesn't wait for your resume. He calls when your heart is awake. That's the pattern throughout the Bible. Noah, building an ark when the world laughed. Esther, risking her life in a foreign palace. Peter, a fisherman called to lead a movement. And now Micah, a voice summoned from obscurity. Proof that God's purpose often interrupts the lives of those who seem least likely. Think for a moment about the cost of obedience. Micah would be misunderstood, opposed by the powerful, sometimes even rejected by his own neighbors. Yet his yes changed the future. It set him on a collision course with kings and priests, but also placed him in the stream of God's redemption. Obedience, not comfort, became Micah's legacy. The same is true today. The world is full of moments when someone is nudged to speak up for the silent, to act when others sit by, to say yes when everything inside wants to say no. Maybe you felt that nudge in a classroom, a boardroom, or around your dinner table. You didn't plan to be the one, but the ache in your heart, the urge to step up, could be the Spirit's call to justice in your world. Micah's story reminds us God's interruptions are not accidents. They are invitations. Invitations to leave the safety of routine and step into a bigger story. The Spirit empowers those who answer, filling them with a strength not their own. So the next time you feel that quiet call, that discomfort, that holy restlessness? Remember Micah. You don't have to be famous or powerful. You just have to say yes. But the story doesn't stop here. For when obedience meets injustice, the world begins to change. Micah's yes is about to echo in the streets of Jerusalem, where truth will collide with tradition, and the courage of one will challenge the conscience of a nation. Will you follow him there? What does it look like when a society shines on the surface, but cracks beneath the weight of its own corruption? Walk with Micah into the heart of Judah, where the sun sets on golden fields, cities buzz with trade, and the temple bustles with ritual. Yet beneath the beauty, something is rotten. Micah saw it everywhere. Judges who sold verdicts to the highest bidder, officials who grew fat on bribes, merchants who rigged their scales, and priests who turned worship into spectacle. The poor were crushed beneath taxes and debts. Widows and orphans disappeared in the crowd, unseen by those who claimed to serve God. This is not just an ancient scene. It is a mirror for every age. Micah watched as power gathered in palaces while hunger gnawed at village doors. He saw religious festivals fill the city with music and incense. But in the alleyways, justice was a stranger. Crowds flocked to the temple, offering sacrifices with lavish ceremony. Voices lifted in prayer, hands outstretched to heaven. But God, through Micah, cut through the noise. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Micah 6:6-7. God's answer was clear. He was not impressed by outward show. He wasn't looking for more gifts or grander rituals. He wanted hearts aligned with justice, lives shaped by mercy. Micah's words landed like thunder. The city was full, but the people were empty. They knew how to go through the motions, but had forgotten the meaning. Even as priests blessed the crowds, the marketplace reeked of greed. Even as the king feasted, children starved just outside the gates. The prophet's vision pierced the illusion. Prosperity that masks injustice is only a house built on sand. Micah saw how easy it was to believe that as long as you followed the rituals, God would overlook the rot. But God's heart broke for the suffering ignored, for the prayers of the poor that never reached the temple steps. Micah's world is not so distant from ours. Today, too, we see societies that glitter with wealth, skyline cities, luxury brands, stadiums full of cheering crowds. But behind closed doors and in quiet neighborhoods, inequality widens. The vulnerable are left behind, and voices calling for justice are drowned out by noise. Consider the warnings of Micah as a warning for now. Rituals and appearances can never substitute for real compassion, for active justice. A country, a church, a family, they rise or fall not on outward achievement, but on the way they treat the least among them. Micah dared to declare that God was not fooled by offerings or ceremonies. He declared, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God." Micah 6:8. That verse is a call that echoes through time. Will we trade comfort for compassion? Will we let our rituals blind us to the hurting at our gates? God's heart, then and now, beats for justice. So the lesson is plain and it is personal. Don't let prosperity numb your conscience. Don't let busy faith drown out the cries of the weak. A society's health is measured by how it treats those with the least power. But the story doesn't stop here. For Micah, exposing corruption was only the beginning. Next, his words would move from warning to confrontation, where the prophet's courage would be tested and God's call would demand more than just words. Are you ready to follow him into the center of the storm? What happens when one voice challenges the crowd? Imagine Micah, a simple man from a small village, walking through the noisy gates of Jerusalem, his sandals caked with dust, his eyes carrying both fear and determination. He has no guards, no title, just the fire of a calling that will not let him stay silent. The city is alive, markets brimming with shouts and deals, temple courts echoing with song and ritual. But Micah does not join the celebration. He stands at the crossroads, where merchants haggle and priests pass in their fine robes. He sees the faces of the hungry, the weary, the invisible. He hears the laughter of those who think they are untouchable, their wealth and power built on the backs of the poor. Micah opens his mouth, and the crowd stills. His words slice through the air. You build houses with blood and lay foundations with injustice. Micah 3:10. A silence falls. People look away, uncomfortable. Some whisper that he's gone too far. The city's elite, judges, priests, nobles, turn to glare at this nobody who dares to accuse them. Yet Micah does not flinch. He repeats God's warning. The same hands that raise palaces have crushed the dreams of widows and orphans. The gold that glitters in the palace halls is stained with the suffering of the forgotten. He tells them the truth, even though every word puts him at risk. He could have remained silent, gone back to the quiet hills of Moresheth, left the powerful to their parties. But a prophet's courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear win. Micah's message is not new. Every generation has its whistleblowers, its activists who confront systems of injustice even when they stand alone. Think of those today who dare to speak truth to governments, to corporations, to religious institutions, often at great personal cost. Their voices shake the world, not because they are many, but because they refuse to be silent. Micah becomes a symbol for all who risk isolation for the sake of justice. The priests try to drown him out. The leaders spread rumors, accusing him of stirring up trouble, calling him a madman, a disturber of the peace. But the prophet stands his ground. His words are a plumb line, measuring the hearts of a city that has forgotten how to blush. It's not just about ancient Jerusalem. Every era needs its Micahs. People willing to step into the public square to risk comfort, reputation, and even safety for the sake of what's right. Real courage is not loud or boastful. It is steady, stubborn, unyielding. Micah's greatest strength is his faithfulness, not his popularity. He faces rejection, but the truth he speaks cannot be silenced. He reminds the crowd and us that what is right matters more than what is safe, and what is true is worth more than applause. Here's the lesson Micah offers. Justice often begins as a single voice, crying out in the wilderness. It is not the majority that makes a thing right. It is the courage to stand for truth, even when you stand alone. So, where are the Micahs in our world today? Where are the voices that call out corruption, that defend the voiceless, that risk being shunned for the sake of what's right? The story doesn't stop here. Micah's confrontation is only the beginning. From this moment, the conflict will escalate, and the prophet's faith will be tested in fire. Are you ready to see what happens when conviction refuses to bow to power? What do you do when you see disaster coming? Warn, walk away, or fall to your knees and plead for mercy? Micah didn't just speak about judgment. He carried the burden of his people's fate in his prayers. He saw the storm before it broke, yet he never stopped hoping for grace. Picture Micah, alone after a long day of warning in the streets. The noise of Jerusalem has faded, but the images God has shown him linger. He sees his beloved city, proud, bustling, strong, crumbling into dust. In his vision, Jerusalem is not untouchable. It will be plowed like a field, Micah 3:12. Streets once filled with laughter will lie silent. The city that boasted of its temples and riches will become a wasteland. This isn't just a threat. It is a prophecy that shatters illusions of safety and power. But here's the soul of Micah's message. Even as he declares judgment, his heart breaks for the people. He's not a prophet who delights in saying, "I told you so." Instead, he stands between the people and the coming storm, lifting up his voice not just in warning, but in intercession. There are moments when Micah's prayers sound like a wrestling match, pleading with God to remember mercy in the midst of justice. He knows that true justice never stands alone. Mercy is the other half of the divine heart. He asks, "Who is a God like you, who pardons sin and forgives the transgression?" Micah 7:18. Think of the impact of such intercession across history. Before Martin Luther King Jr. led marches for justice, he would retreat and pray, not for victory over enemies, but for the strength to love, to forgive, to hope for the very people who might oppose him. That's the spirit Micah carries. Justice, yes, but always with a plea for grace. Micah models a faith that does not simply denounce. He weeps, he pleads, he carries his nation's pain into God's presence. He stands in the gap, reminding us that the prophet's job is not only to confront, but to care. Why does God listen to such prayers? Because they are honest, because they are costly, because they echo God's own longing for restoration, not just retribution. Maybe the greatest courage is not just speaking the truth, but holding space for mercy, even for those who seem to deserve judgment most. Micah reminds us, justice without mercy is a hammer. Mercy without justice is a lie. Only together do they heal a nation. But the story doesn't stop here. From the ashes of judgment, a flicker of hope will rise. Micah's vision will shift from warning of disaster to the promise of a new dawn for those who turn back to God. Are you ready to see how grace writes the final word? What happens when the truth threatens those in power? Why do prophets so often find themselves surrounded by suspicion, not applause? Micah learned quickly. Speaking God's word isn't just hard, it's dangerous. Imagine Micah, his reputation shifting from humble villager to public enemy. The whispers in Jerusalem grow louder. Troublemaker? Agitator. Temple guards begin to watch his steps. Religious leaders, their robes heavy with tradition and pride, feel threatened. For years, they have presided over ceremonies, controlled the narrative, offered answers to the people suffering, so long as no one questioned the system itself. But Micah questions everything. He stands at the gates and in the markets, his words a sharp wind. He exposes the cozy alliances between palace and priest, calls out bribes behind courtroom doors, points to the pain beneath the city's glitter. His message is clear. You cannot buy God's favor while selling out your neighbor. Tensions rise to a breaking point. One day, as he finishes a fiery speech, a group of priests approaches. Their faces are set, their voices tight. They accuse him of stirring panic, undermining unity, dishonoring the sacred. A city needs stability, they say, and prophets like Micah only bring trouble. But Micah stands firm. His voice is steady. These are not my words, but the Lord's. If you oppose me, you oppose what God is saying. Micah 3:8. I am filled with power, with the Spirit of the Lord, and with justice and might to declare their sin to Israel. The confrontation is more than personal. It's a collision between raw truth and entrenched power. Micah doesn't come with weapons, just words. But those words shake foundations. Why? because systems built on privilege and tradition will always defend themselves. Power fears accountability, and when a lone voice dares to say, "Enough," the whole machine pushes back. This pattern isn't unique to Micah. History shows that those who challenge injustice, whether prophets, reformers, or whistleblowers, are almost always met with resistance. Martin Luther King Jr. was called a threat to order. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was branded a traitor. Countless others, known and unknown, paid a price for truth. Yet Micah refuses to be silent. He chooses resolve over retreat. He sees the cost, feels the pressure, but stands his ground. Not because he seeks fame, but because he knows silence is complicity. And so the drama escalates. Every step Micah takes, every word he utters is weighed and watched. Enemies whisper, friends hesitate, but he clings to the conviction that God's word, however costly, must be spoken. The lesson is clear and deeply relevant. Every system, whether ancient temple, modern institution, or social structure, protects its own interests. But truth will not stay silent, and justice never comes without resistance. If you feel called to speak up for what's right, prepare for pushback. But also remember, you're in good company. God stands with those who dare to speak his heart. But the story doesn't stop here. Even as resistance grows, Micah's resolve deepens. And just when the night seems darkest, a promise of hope will pierce the gloom. Stay with the journey, for the final word is not condemnation, but restoration. What if the darkest night wasn't the end, but the moment before dawn? Can a warning of judgment really be the doorway to a new hope? After all the warnings, all the tears, all the tension, Micah's story turns. The voice that thundered judgment now softens, offering a promise that stirs hope even in the rubble. Picture Micah standing outside Jerusalem. Behind him, the city's future is uncertain. But before him, God paints a vision that stretches across generations. He declares, "A ruler will come from Bethlehem, one whose origins are from ancient times." Micah 5:2. This is no ordinary leader. Bethlehem is a small, overlooked village. Yet from its humble fields, the greatest promise will arise. Micah sees beyond the present disaster. He describes a day when swords will be hammered into plowshares, when nations will not train for war anymore. Micah 4:3. A day when people will sit under their own vines and fig trees, and no one will make them afraid. Micah 4:4. In these words, we sense a longing for peace, for restoration, for a world finally made right. But Micah's prophecy isn't just wishful thinking. He points to a specific hope, a Messiah who will gather the scattered, heal the wounded, and rule not with violence, but with shepherd-like care. He says, "He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, and they will live securely, for his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth, and he will be our peace." Micah 5:4-5. Centuries later, these words echo in the gospel stories. When shepherds in Bethlehem hear angel voices, when a child is born in a stable, when hope is born out of obscurity, and justice is fulfilled not by crushing enemies, but by transforming hearts. This is the messianic promise, the bridge from Old Testament longing to New Testament fulfillment. It's why Matthew quotes Micah 5:2, declaring Jesus as the shepherd king who finally brings the peace Micah envisioned. But restoration is never automatic. Micah calls his people and us to turn back, to seek God not just with sacrifices, but with humble, honest hearts. He ends his book with one of the Bible's most beautiful prayers. Who is a God like you, who pardons sin and forgives transgression? You do not stay angry forever, but delight to show mercy. Micah 7:18. Micah reminds us that God's justice is never just destruction. It's a doorway to restoration. No life, no community is beyond hope. Even in judgment, grace is always reaching, waiting to write a new story. Maybe your life feels like a ruin, or you look at our world and see only brokenness. But Micah says, God's mercy is deeper than any wound. No circumstance is too far gone for him to restore. But the story doesn't stop here. Micah's vision of hope is not just ancient poetry, it's a living promise, waiting to be received, waiting to be lived. As we move toward the closing, let's ask, how will you carry this hope into your story today? What if the answer to pleasing God was simpler than we think? Not in grand gestures, not in empty rituals, but in 3 simple instructions that could change the world. What does the Lord really require? Let's return to that crowded street where Micah's voice echoes above the noise. People are weary of rules, traditions, and endless sacrifices. Year after year, they bring offerings to the temple, bulls, rams, rivers of oil, but their hearts feel further from God than ever. Micah stands in their midst, not with a list of new rules, but with a challenge and a hope. He says, He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Micah 6:8. These are not just poetic words. They are the heartbeat of true faith. Micah boils centuries of law, prophecy, and ritual down to a call that every generation can understand. And yet, for many, it is the hardest path of all. Why justice? Because justice makes wrong things right. It means refusing to profit from another's pain. It means standing up when someone is pushed down. For Micah, justice isn't about vengeance. It's about repairing what's been broken in families, cities, and nations. Why mercy? Because mercy reaches where justice alone cannot heal. Mercy forgives debts, lifts burdens, and restores the outcast. It's the choice to answer offense with kindness, to see our enemy as a neighbor in need. Micah's world, like ours, was hard and divided. Mercy is the oil that keeps the machinery of justice from grinding people to dust. Why humility? Because humility is the antidote to pride, the root of so much injustice. To walk humbly with your God means to remember who we are and who God is. It means listening before speaking, serving before seeking status, staying teachable and grateful even when we think we're right. Now, let's get practical. Micah's message was never meant to stay in ancient scrolls. History is filled with those who tried to live these words. Think of Martin Luther King Jr., whose dream was not just of equality, but of a nation judged by the content of their character. Or Mother Teresa, who chose mercy over comfort and humility over recognition, serving the most forgotten with simple acts of love. There are countless unnamed heroes, neighbors who stand up for the bullied, business leaders who pay fair wages, teens who defend classmates from ridicule. Every act of justice, every choice to forgive, every moment of quiet humility. This is worship that reaches God's heart. And what about you? Where does justice need to roll in your own story? Is there a wrong you can make right? A person who needs your mercy? A step you can take toward humility, even when pride whispers otherwise? Micah's challenge is both universal and deeply personal. You don't need a platform, a pulpit, or a priestly robe. You need a willing heart. God is not impressed with how loudly we sing, but how deeply we live out these words. But the story doesn't stop here. There is still the question of how we respond, not just as individuals, but as a community, as a people called to shape the world by God's heart. Micah's call echoes on, inviting us to choose justice, mercy, and humility every day, in every step. We've traveled far, from the quiet fields of Moresheth to the crowded streets of Jerusalem, from Micah's warnings of disaster to his unshakable hope in restoration. What have we learned? That God can call anyone, not just priests or kings, but ordinary people, to stand for justice and mercy. That one voice willing to obey and speak the truth can change the future of a whole nation. But now the question turns to you. Are you living for comfort or for calling? Where does justice need to roll down in your world? Are there places in your life, your family, your city that are waiting for a voice of courage? Maybe yours? Micah's legacy lives on every time someone chooses truth over silence, compassion over apathy, humility over pride. God's greatest requirements were never about rituals, but about a life that acts justly, loves mercy, and walks humbly with Him. So if this story stirred something in you, if Micah's journey came alive, please like this video. Share in the comments what's one injustice you feel called to speak against, and subscribe. Turn on the bell, because next time we'll explore the stormy faith of Nahum or a Habakkuk, finding hope when the world shakes. Remember, one heart, one voice can let justice roll down like a river. Maybe tonight that voice is yours.